launch ballistic missiles during peacetime from their own territory. They've done it against a non-state actor, and they've done it against twice, ISIS in Syria, and once against a Kurdish dissident group in northern Iraq. Neither time did they ask the national government for permission. They've done it there, but they've never struck another state operating in another state during peacetime. So this would be a fundamentally different shift for them. Moreover, this is ballistic missiles, not rockets or mortars. So this is actually a weapon of war. This is a tool designed to kill Americans, to send a political message, to send a deterrent message that you shouldn't try to respond to Iran's response. And so I think this is the Iranians willing to telegraph that this came from our territory, that we are responding to this development.
Right.
And part of what may be feeding this desire to publicize is that they think the Trump administration may not escalate, or that they think that they have something to gain at home, on the home front, and to further work towards that rally around the flag effect that we talked about.
And quickly, Benham, what has Iraq's response been so far? Have we heard anything from the government?
I haven't heard anything, but as has often been the case, Iraq is stuck between a rock and a hard place.
Yeah.
Iraq is caught between this larger game of competition for Baghdad's hearts, heads, and minds because of this zero-sum competition between America and Iran. And that does not look like it's going away anytime soon.
Right.
It's going to continue in 2020, regardless of how the administration responds to this strike.
And is Iraq likely to respond to Iran if Iraqis are killed?
I don't think so. I think they may write that off as collateral damage, for lack of a better word. The Iranians, of course, may say that this is because you permitted your country to be used as a base against us. But I don't think the Iraqis who are pro-Iran in that country, and that is a lot of the political class, but not all of it, would even look to publicize that.
Right. Right. All right. I'd also like to bring in Tara Kopp. She is a National Military and Veterans Affairs correspondent at McClatchy. Tara, thank you so much. On the operations front, what do we know about what has happened so far?
So 3 sites, Al-Assad, Erbil, and Taji, have all been targeted. There are damage assessments being done at all 3 locations. I think that you were just talking about the importance of Al-Assad. It's very important to underscore how important Erbil is to the U.S. because it's not only where it has been focus of a lot of its northern Iraq Kurdish partner training, but also a major point of supply and communication to U.S. forces that are serving in Syria. So that's, that base has dual importance. I think everybody right now is waiting to see what the damage assessment is and to see about casualties. There are some early reports that there have been Iraqi casualties. There's no reports so far on U.S. casualties. But at that point, I think as your previous guest was saying, additional American casualties is a real red line for this administration, and it could see another escalation.
And we don't yet know how Iraqi casualties would factor into that calculation. But looking forward, where does the U.S. response go from here? Obviously, as you said, the assessment is still being made. But once that assessment is made, how quickly is the U.S. likely to respond? Do you think we could see some response tonight?
I think that they would be very cautious in a response and a calculated response to make sure that, it's those uncalculated moves that drive everybody into an unintended war.
Right.
There are all sorts of assets throughout the region between the USS Bataan with its 2,200 Marine Expeditionary Unit forces. There are new B-52s on Diego Garcia that can strike Iran. There are thousands of additional ground forces that have been moved into the region. So there are a lot of options available to the U.S. And we tonight, just as these attacks were happening, our McClatchy paper, the Sacramento Bee, was able to break an exclusive interview with the widow of the U.S. contractor that was killed in Kirkuk on December 27th. And just to remind everyone, it was that U.S. contractor's death and then the injuries to the 4 U.S. service members that became almost a launching pad, a catalyst. Like, that was a bridge too far, that these Iranian proxies had now been targeting and hitting and inciting injuries on Americans themselves. They have been injuring and killing Iraqis in a lot of these attacks, but that had not driven the type of response that you saw when we did the drone strike on Soleimani. His widow, it was a young couple, it was Iraqi Americans. They had both come to the U.S. in 2011, live in a single bedroom apartment in Sacramento, and our Sacramento reporters were able to walk the neighborhood, talk to them, and had this heartbreaking interview with the widow, learning, well, what's next for her. Mm-hmm. And she literally was just saying, do you want to go back to Iraq? And no, what is there left for her?
Right. Oh, that is heartbreaking. Oh, thank you so much, Tara Kopp, for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
CBS News intelligence and national security reporter Olivia Gazis joins me now on the phone. Hi, Olivia. What is the latest you can tell us?
Hi, Tanya. Well, I can tell you that our intelligence agencies have, of course, been tracking any and all retaliatory options that Iran was expected to pursue, and everybody had been on full alert and prioritizing force protection in the region. A strike of this sort requires vehicles and personnel to move around and prepare. So it's likely that we had decent visibility into the fact that it was going to happen. Mm-hmm. I'm taking a look at an assessment of Iran's military capabilities put out by the Defense Intelligence Agency, and it is worth noting that Iran is known to have the largest and most diverse ballistic missile arsenal in the Middle East. So it has this big inventory of missiles with different ranges, close range, short range, medium range, and we don't yet know, I don't think, what kinds of missiles were used in this attack. We'll expect to get more details on that later. It's also worth noting that Iran, among the menu of options that the Iranians were expected to pursue were these regional attacks on U.S. military and diplomatic interests. So we did anticipate this sort of thing. I think it is notable that these were launched from mainland Iran, mm-hmm. as the Pentagon earlier confirmed. So we'll see if this is the first step of many retaliatory responses, but it is a notable first step that the Iranians have taken here.
Now, it's quite a distance from the Al-Assad air base and the Iranian border. Were these missiles not detected prior to impact?
I'm not sure that we know exactly that information as yet, Tanya, but some of these missiles that the Iranians are known to have can travel up to 2,000 kilometers. They can make it as far as Israel, of course, and southeastern Europe. So it's not sort of out of
right.
It's not out of the range of possibilities that they have.
Right.
Artillery that will make this cover this distance.
Okay, Olivia, thank you so much. Please stand by, if you will. I also want to bring in Robbie Grammer. He's a diplomacy and national security reporter at Foreign Policy. So, Robbie, what's been the diplomatic response so far? I mean, I know we're still assessing damage, and there will certainly be a military response forthwith, but what has been the diplomatic response?
Hi, Tanya. Thanks. Well, right now, obviously, it's still in the initial aftermath. Reportedly, Trump's national security team, including Secretary Pompeo, is meeting at the White House. But earlier today, Pompeo spoke to reporters and said that the Trump administration was prepared to respond to retaliation in any form from Iran, saying in event the Iranians make another bad choice, the president will respond in a way that he did last week, which was decisive, serious, and messaged. And so I think what we're going to see right now, in the immediate aftermath is the team coming together, consulting with allies and having, charting a path forward, keeping in mind that a lot of the allies and obviously the government in Iraq are incredibly afraid of how this could escalate and potentially stumble into a broader conflict between Tehran and Washington.
Yeah, give us a sense of what American allies must be thinking right now in the initial aftermath of this. I mean, we do know that some American allies were withdrawing their troops from Iraq as a result of the attack on General Soleimani. What must they be thinking at this point?
Well, the foreign diplomats that I've been talking to, everyone agrees that Iran is this destabilizing force in the region, but they're really nervous right now. Mm-hmm. We saw NATO withdraw its military training mission in Iraq. We've seen allies like Britain and Canada either prepare to withdraw withdraw or move troops. So they're urging restraints on both sides now, and also reaching out to the Iranians, to the Iranian foreign minister, engaging him in Brussels to try to find an off-ramp to this escalation.
And how is Iraq responding? Has there been any response from the government? How is this playing out on Iraqi news stations?
Well, right now there hasn't been. I think it's too soon to tell what the official Iraqi response will be. But from some of the experts and Iraqi officials I've spoken to, this just confirms a lot of their worst fears that Iraq is going to be caught in the crossfire here of this escalating tension and conflict between the United States and Tehran. I can't directly confirm, but there have been reports of Iraqi casualties already in the initial aftermath. Though the U.S. is still doing its damage assessments, and there haven't been any reports yet of any casualties of U.S. service members.
Right. And is Iraq likely to respond to these casualties? Who are they likely to blame for them?
It's difficult to say. I think it's true that the U.S.-Iraqi relationship has really deteriorated quickly since the killing of Soleimani. We've seen the Iraqi parliament call for the expulsion of U.S. troops, and Trump threatening sanctions against Iraq if it does so, which is really unprecedented. And keep in mind, the government, amid all these protests, is in a really precarious position with an acting prime minister. So it's in a really difficult position, but I'm not sure it has much leverage to respond either on the Iraqi or on the U.S. side so far.
And, I want to bring in Ben Taliblu once again. Behnam, I'm still not clear on what exactly the end game is here for Iran.
So I think Iran wants to say that they won't take a strike that killed their most important military figure in the past 40 years lying down. And moreover, they don't want to create the impression that Iran absorbs retaliation, much like the U.S. had absorbed a fair amount of retaliation and escalation from May to December of 2019.
Right, but that's still a temporary, positioning, and that's sort of temporary posturing. What is their ultimate end goal in terms of their relationship with the U.S.?
Well, the relationship is to continue to have a war with the U.S. Iran, in many ways, has been on war footing with Washington since 1979, since the divorce of two friends during the Cold War period into two now very bitter enemies who are actually now at loggerheads physically, it seems like. But the assumption that Iran wanted to send a signal is driven by something larger, and it's driven by Iran saying to America that when you threaten, we'll threaten. There's a Persian saying for this: a missile against a missile. So Iran is trying to reestablish its own deterrence. You've heard the Trump administration talk about trying to deter Iran, trying to limit Iran's freedom of action in the region. This is Iran trying to push back on that and saying, no, we have a free hand in the region. You will not impede our access to the region. And they're choosing a missile, given the capabilities that they have to respond to that. So it's a missile for a missile, a threat for a threat. Even in 2012, when there wasn't any of this going on, when we were a year outside of the interim nuclear deal, Khamenei took to the nation then, and he said a threat against a threat, and that was when Iran launched a couple of foreign terrorist campaigns in response to EU oil sanctions. So Iran does respond with a different tool based on a different threat, but it's always trying to equalize, always trying to create the impression that it will not let one linger.
But how does that serve it? How does it serve the country ultimately, economically?
Economically, Iran is still playing a medium-term game. He knows that this is an election year for Washington. You can look at the Dow price right now. Oil prices have spiked just a bit right now. Iran is trying to dislodge the Trump administration. Let's be clear. Maximum pressure was remarkably effective, but in record time on macroeconomic indicators alone, like GDP, oil exports, value of the currency relative to the dollar. On all these things, the U.S. had accomplished economic pain in Iran unilaterally, not even multilaterally. So the whole point of Iran's escalation campaign since May against the drone, against the oil facilities, is to upend this sanction strategy. And the only way it seems like the strategy will be upended is if there's a different occupant in the White House.
Right.
So the goal is to have this death by 1,000 cuts campaign against Washington, where Washington absorbs escalation and retaliation and says that's not worth responding to, looks weak, absorbs it further, and is ultimately voted out.
Right. All right. So Hunter Walker joins us now on the phone. He's a White House correspondent for Yahoo News. news. Hunter, I know that you've been reaching out to the Trump administration. What is the Pentagon saying?
Well, right now, as of a few minutes ago, we did not have any information about casualties, but they did confirm that more than a dozen ballistic missiles were launched at these two bases in Iraq. They believe they were launched from Iran. Interestingly, one of the bases, Al-Assad, is actually where President Trump visited last year. So that's pretty much everything we're hearing. Obviously, it's a pretty fast-moving situation, but they have confirmed there was a strike, and we do not have information about casualties.
And pretty much all the top officials, the vice president, secretary of state, everybody is convened at the White House right now?
Yeah, the press secretary, Stephanie Grisham, told me that the president had been briefed. I reached out to her right at the initial reports of the attack, and she also said that he's monitoring the situation. So, I do believe that, we also heard from the DOD that they are following this very, very closely, as you would expect.
Right, but at this point, no additional information about American casualties, and the damage is still being assessed. Is that correct?
Exactly. As of about an hour ago, they were saying that they are still getting battle damage reports. I think, the main question on everybody's mind now is what comes next. I mean, we saw the president in the Oval Office today during his meeting with the Greek prime minister, and, he backed off from this earlier threat he issued this weekend to target Iranian cultural sites because there was a lot of backlash that's actually against international military law.
Right.
But he did say that if Iran, does anything to hit American citizens or American assets, that we would respond, he said, quote unquote, very strongly. So I think the big question on everyone's mind tonight, I'm sure your listeners as well, is sort of when does this chain of retaliation stop, and does it stop at all?
Exactly. Where does it lead? Thank you so much. Behnam, I want to bring you in if you're still there. Is there any speculation about the exact type of missile that Iran used?
There's no official report from Iranian sources or from Washington through the DOD or anything else yet. But if past its prologue here, Iran, again, has launched single-stage, solid-fueled, short-range ballistic missiles from its territory into Iraq and Syria in 2017 and 2018. The entire class of that family is called the Fateh class, or the Victory class. It's got 4 or 5 different variants. Some of them have a separating warhead. Some of them can carry just under 400, 500 kilos. And they can go up to anywhere from 300 to just under 700 kilometers. So much depends on this. These are road mobile missiles. They're carried towards the border on these things called TELs, transporter erector launchers. So this raises questions of how much did the U.S. see, if anything at all? Was it under the cover of darkness? Was this from a silo, or was this from a TEL? And the type of missile, again, will matter, because this will mean for the first time that Iran used a domestically produced system for such a high-risk, high-publicity attack.
Right. And are we likely to see any response tonight, or is the administration going to sleep on it? We do know that the Secretary of State Pompeo is currently at the White House. But is this... Sorry.
I think I saw an unconfirmed report. I'm still waiting for confirmation. The president may speak. I don't know if that's going to be confirmed or not. I saw it roaming around somewhere online. It would simply make sense to address the nation now, especially if there are no casualties on the American side from any battle damage assessments. Again, we're still publicly waiting for that to trickle on down. If there are American casualties, then I think there would be a response in a much shorter time frame.
So what would Iran's off-ramp be here if they decide that the increased escalation is not working for them? How could they pull out of this and save face?
I think it's going to be very difficult for the Iranians to save face if the administration responds on Iranian territory. I think if it's on Iranian territory, there's almost certainly going to be some kind of reaction by Iran. If there's a strike in Iraq or a strike against an Iranian asset elsewhere or offshore, the Iranians could absorb that. The Iranians, of course, may be hoping that there isn't even that, and that Washington absorbs this attack against the Ain al-Assad base in western Iraq.
Right. And right now, I think that we are looking at video. Maybe the producers can clarify. These are missiles from Iranian state TV. So they were launched from Tehran. Of course, we know that this has been reported all afternoon from Iranian state TV. Benham, do we know what the story is from the Iranian side? How are they spinning this attack?
Well, spin is a very interesting word. It gets me into media right now because the former secretary of Iran's Supreme National Security Council, he was the nuclear negotiator at the end of the Ahmadinejad era, also someone very hardline, very, very zealous. He tweeted, I believe, a picture of the Iranian flag. If you remember when Soleimani was struck by the drone, Trump tweeted a picture of the American flag, and several members of the administration or several other official accounts tweeted the American flag. So this is the Iranians, again, trying to play the media game, trying to play the narrative game. They are very cognizant of how this is being framed abroad. They understand that the West is surprised. They understand that this does not fit with the past mold of Iranian responses, of Iran's traditional method of escalation, hiding its hand, proxy warfare. This is very forward. This is very bold, and they're letting this trickle out into their media. There's even an unconfirmed video that I saw from another military watcher on Twitter that had a picture of Soleimani in the booth in the area where the missiles were launched, so clearly symbolizing that this is in response to the killing of Soleimani. So they're spinning this as retaliatory, they're spinning this as defensive, but again, this is one very large, very costly, very dangerous signaling exercise by the Iranians.
Absolutely. All right, Benham, hang on, if you will, stay with us. I'm going to bring Olivia Gazis back in. Olivia, Esper, Pompeo, and O'Brien are all meeting at the White House right now. What do we know?
Well, we know that they are in the Situation Room, likely reviewing the intelligence that is coming in and discussing what the U.S. does in response, if anything. Of course, the message from this senior leadership has been that de-escalation is the goal. The Secretary of Defense saying today that the goal was not to start a war, but warning that the U.S. will finish one if need be. The president, of course, also said earlier today that the United States was totally prepared to respond to Iraq. But I think it's worth noting that the Iranians fully recognize that they can't compete with the U.S. As in a conventional sort of battle. And so this is the reason that they have historically prioritized these capabilities that are asymmetrical, whether that is cyber warfare, whether that is proxy warfare. And so it may be that they decide that they have exacted enough of a toll here and would stop if the United States stopped too. That will, of course, depend on whether there are any American casualties, which the president has previously said was a red line for the United States. And he has, of course, threatened any number of other measures in the war of words that had mostly ensued immediately following the strike on Soleimani. It will be an outgrowth of their conversation tonight in the Situation Room as to what next steps the United States will take.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Olivia. Let's bring in Dave Sears now. He's a retired Navy SEAL. Dave, what can you tell us about the choice of retaliation on the part of the Iranians? I mean, they could have done a cyber attack. They could have tried to target a domestic soft target. Instead, they went for something a little flashy, something that they could show on state TV and something fairly aggressive. What does that tell you?
Well, I think for one, you're right that it is flashy so they can show it on state TV, but I would also caution that we don't know if it's done yet.
Right.
So I would still say that, Israel could be targeted by Hezbollah, those proxies that Iran has there. Saudi Arabia is certainly a right target for Iran as well, and you could see some things in Yemen or the Gulf. We don't know where they're going to go. We don't know if they're going to use any of their asymmetric capabilities yet or how that plays into it. So hopefully this is the only salvo that they have, or two salvos as we're seeing it, and that they want to make a very public statement to their people that we're getting revenge.
Right.
That's on their side.
And they're hoping, you assume, or we assume, that this is where it ends.
I think that that's what Iran's hoping. I think that would be a huge miscalculation. I just can't see the president, after his speech and drawing the red line at U.S. casualties or U.S. assets coming under targeting.
Well,
that if
let's
there's
talk
any
about that
casualties
for a
at all,
second. Do you think that it's one thing if there are some U.S. casualties here, but what if it turns out that there are not?
That'll be interesting on how he's going to deal with that. I still think, these are joint U.S.-Iraqi bases, so there's likely to be equipment, and I think that you are going to see, if I had to guess exactly sort of what the president called for, you're going to see a completely disproportionate response from our side. You can't have this, one-for-one type response. I think that what he's likely looking at giving them is a very overwhelming response.
What would that look like?
That would look like completely wiping out their ability to project power. That means ballistic missile targets, so they can't launch any more, naval targets, any possible nuclear targets that they're developing. It could be possible Quds Force locations outside of Iran that are their asymmetric things that are in Syria. We know their bases there. I think it could be a large array of all of the above. And
wouldn't that result,
especially if there's casualties,
wouldn't that result then in just more of a military commitment to the region than this administration really wants, has a stomach for?
I don't think if you actually have that overwhelming response, it completely eliminates Iran's ability to do anything.
Are you talking about sort of shock and awe?
We have that capability. Yeah, no, we could degrade their capability to the point that they have none. It's not, Iran isn't like the United States. It's not that big. It's not Russia or China. So you could conceivably target all their capability to do things if you really wanted to.
So, and that would be without a regime change, just leaving the government there and just wiping out their military.
Yeah, absolutely. And then saying, okay, leave it to the people. What do you want to do? And I think you would have another effect as well if you stick to military targets, especially as they are in Iran. You can really, really limit any civilian casualties on the populace. And remember, the people aren't super happy with the regime in Iran right now.
No, there have been a lot of protests,
There's a lot of protests. And so which way do they go on this? If they see, now one of the reasons that they have such a problem with the regime or doing anything about it is, for example, the last protests, I think there were reports of, up to 1,500 Iranian civilians killed, another 2,000 imprisoned. They can't do anything. But if you take out
let me know if you can hear me and not the broadcast. Okay, can you hear me and not the broadcast? So, I don't know, is the broadcast running in the background over me? Let me see. Okay, cool. You probably hear the speakers a little bit. I'm just trying to find out what's going on. But, guys, this could be a big problem. It really could be. It could be a big problem. We'll just let it play here on the side. Okay, we're starting to get a little bit more footage. What's going on here? It's no new news. They told us that it was going to happen.
have not been remotely as easy.
I don't know. It's going to get serious. All right, I'm just making sure you can hear me. Like I said, they vowed that they're going to do stuff. You know, they're gonna take revenge. They are definitely going to take action, and you know, I don't know. It's just really, really scary right now. I don't want a war either. But if you look at all the prophecies and all the agendas, like you know, UN Agenda 21 and things like that, it's honestly not. It's not unheard of that this, you know, would happen. It's just we got to really focus on ourselves, and we got to come together as a country. We can't be 50-50 divided like, you know, we have been. We can't be like, oh, Democrats and Republicans. Everybody's got to be together, because you saw them, and they were really right on point. They were really right on point with their targeted attacks. And believe me, they have more weapons than they have led on to believe. Trust me. And this was around 5:30 p.m. Eastern Time when they had achieved or had received word that these bases were hit. So what are your thoughts, guys? What do you think? Do you think we're going to war? Well, let's see what they're saying.
Struck back, and they struck back hard, because from you're sitting at home in Iran watching state TV. It looks like a big deal, right, on your television set. So could this be, you know, the end of it? Are there sober enough minds in Washington that could say, look, we don't like it, but if there are no American casualties, maybe we let it end here? Is that possible?
Yeah, I think one big question that I have is there any deconfliction channel between the U.S. and Iran now?
Mm-hmm.
You know, there have been some reports that Oman and Qatar have tried to sort of act as a go-between. It's not really clear how effective that was. Mm-hmm. I think one thing, and I'm sure you've brought this up earlier, but I think one thing that it's super important for viewers to understand is just how major of a figure Qasem Soleimani was to the Iranian people. Right. One source close to the president, you know, framed it as, you know, being equivalent to if the Iranians had killed Norman Schwarzkopf, the U.S. general from the first Gulf War. But I think it even goes beyond that. A lot of the people that I'm talking to say that, you know, with his stature in the society, it was almost like, you know, somewhere between Secretary of Defense, Vice President, and Secretary of State all rolled into one. Well, so there definitely is an element of face saving for the Iranians here. And on Fars TV, one of the state TV networks, they are framing this attack as quote unquote revenge.
Right. And I would say that that's the regime's perspective. But as Dave and I were discussing earlier, and Benham and I were discussing earlier, there have been, you know, many elements within Iran that are unhappy with the regime. You know, some younger people looking for some more civil freedoms. Other, even as Benham was explaining, even sort of blue-collar areas of Iran have now joined these protests, which were largely about a year ago or 2 years ago, more of the elites, you know, protesting. And so I'm just curious how much of that status that you afford to Soleimani really was universal in Iran.
Yeah, I would not purport to be an expert on that at all. I mean, I think obviously we saw the Green Revolution in Iran right at the turn of the last decade. There definitely is opposition to the regime there, which is, you know, which has been pretty brutal to its own people and pretty repressive.
Without a shadow of a doubt.
But you know, it's just I think as we learned with some of the American adventurism that we saw in Iraq and Afghanistan around the beginning of the century. It's just really hard to predict where this stuff goes. I should say I have a little bit of breaking news coming in on my phone right now. The White House press secretary, Stephanie Grisham, just told me the president is not planning to speak tonight. So it does not sound like we are going to hear from President Trump, at least on television this evening.
All right, interesting. Dave, I want to get your perspective on, these groups that you said that we've discussed earlier that were unhappy with the Iranian regime. I mean, on the one hand, has that sort of dissatisfaction or that division in Iranian society,
it's useful to look ahead to tomorrow, guys. I can talk about.
Has that sort of gone away now with this unified mourning over this beloved general?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, how much does we know, speaking generally, that wars tend to unify countries and overcome some of their internal domestic happiness. I mean, often countries in the past have used wars to get over domestic problems.
Right.
So how much did, Soleimani was not beloved by all.
Right.
He was a large figure that came from, grew up in the, just post-revolution, the Iran-Iraq war is really where he came to sort of begin to come to prominence. He was injured there and then began working his way up. He's not an real original big player in the revolution, but he does continue on from the Iran-Iraq war. So people were divided, especially because of his role in coming in to squash the student protests. Mm-hmm. So he did play a big role in that, and people knew that. And the understanding, I mean, with all due respect to Hunter, I would never compare Soleimani to Norman Schwarzkopf. It's just not a comparison that's there. The atrocities that he committed throughout his career and how he's done things are pretty well documented. And the way that it works, we can't mirror image our politics with Iran. Iran is a very factional political system. And you have Soleimani, the IRGC, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, right? Mm-hmm. That is not the only army. They're the guardians of the revolution. Mm-hmm. So Iran also has an army and an Iranian Navy. Then they have what's called the IRGC, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, that's there to guard the revolution.
Interesting.
Within that segment, you have the IRGC Quds Force. And Quds in Farsi is Jerusalem.
Here now.
That's what Soleimani was in charge of. Mm-hmm. And their job is to export the revolution. That's why he's primarily external and does things in Syria, Yemen, Thailand, tries to coordinate assassinations in Washington, D.C.
Okay. I'm still learning the OBS. Again, I'm not real sure if I'm allowed to show this, but the point is, at this point, I think you guys have kind of gotten enough of this, but let me just hide that. And then I'll position my camera. OBS is really pretty cool for a lot of things. There we go. Just like that. Nope, no reports of casualties yet. They're literally just now evaluating the post-battle situation. I'm going to see. Let me check Twitter. I think that's a safe place to go, right? Oh. Oh my God. Let me show this. So I'm going to go ahead and put this on. This is an unconfirmed video on Twitter showing the impact of the ballistic missiles. We'll play it a couple of times just in case people miss it.
Dave, I want to bring it in now because Olivia, I understand we have what's going on at the White House.
Well, mainly, Tanya, I just want to know that the reminder and congressional briefings that are expected to take place. It's unclear if they will. But Congress has been pretty vehemently, at least Democrats, demanding some answers, demanding some the strike.
Like I said, you know, I'm trying to get all the news I can for you. Let's check out Twitter here, because we can show that. The regime in Iran says revenge has begun. No, not all Muslims are bad. Just like not all black people, white people, Asians, etc. They're not all bad. I don't think so, but we can definitely check that for you, Steve-O. No. He hadn't said anything, and I wouldn't expect it to. All right, what else we got? Australia is reporting yeah, he's in the situation room, and we're not leaving, is what they're saying. We are not leaving Iraq. We're working on initial battle damage assessment. Assistant to the Secretary of Defense, Jonathan Hoffman, said in a statement. Iranian state television described it as revenge operation over the killing of Revolutionary Guard Soleimani last week. This operation was named Martyr Soleimani. Is Russia involved? I don't know just yet. There was apparently a stampede over during Soleimani's funeral that has killed 50. See, according to this map, I mean, as you can see here, guys, look. Iran, Iraq, the base, everything's not far. Not far at all, right? There's another photograph here. These are the projectiles in flight. Did you date for a while? Cool. What else we got? Pretty much like everything right here is kind of the same. Okay, here's one from this asshole in Iran. It's getting messy now. Pro-Hezbollah channel reports that the IRGC are threatening that any country that serves as a launch pad for U.S. strikes against Iran will be seen as a target. That's like every country around Iran except for Syria. They can't fight everyone. See this? This guy here? No problem, Steve-O, no problem. I don't want to piss anybody off, but, you know, it is what it is. Here, you know, I was going to take a small nap, but I saw this, and I'm like, nope. Breaking news right here. Mr. Stein says Iranian missile attack resulted in casualties among Iraqis only, and that was from the Pentagon. I honestly, I would not expect him to. I really wouldn't. I wouldn't expect him to. It's too much. It's too much. It is way too much. Let's go back. I really don't want to get in trouble, but we're going to do it anyway. Okay, here we go. Make sure this is on the correct window. It's not. Let's take a peek and see what they're saying now. Ready?
The attacks occurred, more than a dozen ballistic missiles, and now the U.S. is, quote unquote, evaluating what its response will be. But the U.S. has been warning for days now that Iran would be held responsible for any attack against American interests. And here you have an attack launched directly from Iranian territory on two bases where American troops are located. So I don't think there's any doubt that this attack crosses a red line and will draw a retaliatory strike. And the question really is the retaliatory strike going to be limited in scope to just the missile base, for instance, which fired these missiles, or is it going to be a much broader attack which goes after headquarters of the Iranian Revolutionary Guards, for instance, since that is the military unit that launched these strikes? All that is still in play right now, as is any assessment of how much damage was done to these bases by these missiles. The Pentagon is saying very little about that for the simple reason that it doesn't want Iran to know whether their attack met with any success. So the fact that the Pentagon is saying it is still evaluating battle damage is really just a placeholder on what really happened.
So you're saying that at this point the Pentagon knows exactly how much damage there was?
Well, they certainly have reports of how much damage there was. One of the first things that would be reported is the extent of casualties, because of course you'd need medical assistance, and we just haven't heard.
Let me turn this off. The Pentagon's not saying much, and that's for security reasons, clearly, right? We don't want them knowing. Okay, I gotta fix you. There we go. You have to forgive me, guys. I'm learning here. I'm learning, right? Let's put him like so. There we go. There, that looks better. What do you think? So, yes, there are confirmed Iraqi deaths. But there are not any confirmed U.S. deaths. And they're saying the Pentagon's not saying much because they don't want Iran to know how the attack went or didn't go or anything like that. So, I mean, it's pretty much right now we're just kind of going into what's going on. I encourage you to watch CBS or Fox or whatever if you're curious. See, that's why I'm doing this. People don't have cable TV. You know, we have to be knowledgeable. We have got to stand together, and we've got to spread the knowledge truthfully, right? But we have to be on top of stuff. We can't be just leaving people in the dark. That's how people get hurt. I'm just kind of watching this in the background, you know, so that we don't get flagged by YouTube. But it's my duty as an American citizen to help other people when there is breaking news. It's my duty to make sure that they have a way to see it. I consider this fair use because we're commenting on it, and that's why my face is in the picture. But, you know, that's why it's hard to find anything about hurricanes or anything else online because, you know, they want you to pay those cable bills. They want you to get into the system. They want you to have all your money tied up in somewhere else. You know what I mean? So I don't ask for donations. You're welcome to donate if you want to, but I don't ask for it. I never have, never will. Let's see what this whore is saying.
Saying explicitly that it was a reprisal for the killing of Commander Soleimani. And the guards have also posted video of what they say are the outgoing missiles being fired from Iran. The missile is a surface-to-surface missile, a well-known weapon in the arsenal. Perhaps more concerning, the guards are also saying that if the United States responds to this attack, the guards in turn will retaliate. So they're really making an explicit threat of escalation. And we heard from David a couple of minutes ago that he believes the U.S. will respond. So this is looking like a very dangerous situation that could in fact get a lot worse.
Absolutely. And Weija, you are there in Washington. Do we have any more information about how the administration might respond to this attack?
We know that President Trump has been meeting all night long in the Situation Room with Vice President Mike Pence, Secretary of Defense Mark Esper, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, and his National Security Advisor. And so far, we have not heard anything from the president online or in person. And CBS News has just learned that he will not be making any sort of formal remarks tonight from here at the White House. But certainly the question is what their next move will be. And we know that this is something they've already been mapping out.
But watching or listening to those podcasts will give you a lot of information, a lot of inside information, and a lot of different secrets and stuff, trade secrets and secrets like from the Bilderberger Group. We talk about everything. Okay, you need to stay woke.
Is to say that if Iran were to do anything, were to make bad decisions, that this administration would be ready to respond. And I think part of the reason why we are not hearing from the president tonight is because they still have to decide exactly what that looks like and weigh the potential consequences, because Democrats on Capitol Hill are already publicly expressing their concerns that this could only be the beginning, that there could be a tit for tat. And, you know, if the U.S. responds as it promises to do, what will Iran do next? We know that the vice president has briefed House Speaker Nancy Pelosi along with Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, and they are publicly speaking out as well, with Pelosi saying that these needless provocations from the administration have to stop because America and the world cannot afford war. And so it's an extremely tense situation here at the White House with really no answers as the president continues to huddle. But I can tell you, Tanya, that in light of these escalating tensions, the U.S. Secret Service has beefed up its presence here at the White House.
And we know that lawmakers were all set to get a briefing on that original attack against General Soleimani, and that was supposed to happen tomorrow. Is this briefing still going to take place as scheduled, and will it now include more information about the damage done by these two attacks and the retaliation planned?
Well, as far as we know, it is still on as scheduled. Just today, the White House briefed the Gang of 8 of congressional leaders with classified information regarding that Soleimani attack. But certainly, if that happens tomorrow, as it's expected to, there will be brand new questions about what has now developed and what the administration plans to do moving forward. You know, Pelosi is planning to take a vote, was planning, perhaps still is, especially in light of what happened, to take a vote on a resolution to limit President Trump's military actions against Iran. And so these are issues that definitely Democrats will be raising because they are concerned that, number one, it was not worth it to take out Soleimani, given the residual danger that we are already seeing now. And number two, they want to stop potential escalation because even though the president and his cabinet members have said the ball is in Iran's court to de-escalate, many critics of the administration are arguing that the U.S. has to de-escalate as well. And so they have to somehow come to a compromise before we frankly do end up in war.
All right. Weijia Jiang at the White House. Thank you. And our thanks to Elizabeth Palmer and Holly Williams as well. We're going to bring back in Hunter Walker. Hunter, we just heard from Weijia about, the huddle that's taking place at the White House and the calculations that are going to be made tonight and the briefing that lawmakers are set to get, from officials about that first strike. And now there are going to be very different questions regarding that first strike. I mean, I think lawmakers wanted to ask, what's the plan in place for the response? And now we've seen the response. So a lot is going to be, compiled in tomorrow's briefing. How do you expect Democrats will respond to this?
Yeah, well, I think it's an issue for it's an issue for Democrats on the Hill. And we're already seeing our first indications that it's an issue for Democrats on the 2020 campaign trail. Vice President Joe Biden was at a fundraiser tonight, and it was in the suburbs of Philadelphia. And according to Julia Taruso, the local pool reporter for the Philly Inquirer, he briefly addressed the strikes while, prefacing it by saying he didn't have many details and he only wanted to speak generally. Joe Biden's comment was that, quote, what's happening in Iraq and Iran today was predictable. Not exactly what's happening, but the chaos that's ensuing. And he blamed Trump for withdrawing from the nuclear deal and also for the killing of Soleimani. Mm-hmm. He said of Trump, quote, some of the things he's done and said in the meantime have been close to ludicrous, including threatening to bomb holy sites. And I just pray to God as he goes through what's happening as we speak, that he's listening to his military commanders for the first time, because so far that has not been the case. Right. So I think Biden's comments are really indicative of how we're going to see Democrats, really criticize President Trump for the escalation here.
Well, let's just drill down for a second on that threat by President Trump that was widely criticized, that threat to attack, national or, religious artifacts or institutions in Iraq. I believe the administration has backed down. I think Mark Esper was asked about that at one point, and he said that would constitute a war crime, and we don't commit war crimes. And I believe the president may have said something today that indicated he was backing down from that specific threat as well. Is that your understanding?
Yeah, so, what happened was over the weekend, the president tweeted that, the U.S. had 52 sites in Iran, representing the 52 hostages that were taken at the U.S. Embassy during the revolution there, and that these sites, were ready to be targeted in the event of any Iranian retaliation. Now, that immediately prompted a bit of a backlash because a lot of people, said that it's against military law to target cultural sites. Right. So the president did back away from that. What he said in the Oval Office today, I have it right in front of me, was, this is a quote from President Trump, we are, according to various laws, supposed to be very careful with our cultural heritage. And you know what? If that is what the law is, I like to obey the law.
Right.
But think of it. They kill our people, they blow up our people, and then we have to be very gentle with their cultural institutions. I'm okay with it, but he said if Iran does anything that they shouldn't be doing, they're going to be suffering the consequences, and very strongly.
Right. That's
so
sort
he did seem to back away from the specific threat to cultural sites, but he certainly didn't back down from, the red line with Iran.
No, absolutely. It's sort of a sorry, I'm not sorry kind of response. And in terms of a response that the White House might be framing today, we just heard David Martin at the Pentagon saying that he believes that this attack, whether or not American lives were lost, constitutes a crossing of the red line that the White House was talking about. What can we infer from the president's tweets and what he's said about the strength of the retaliation that might follow? Because in some ways, he may have boxed himself into a bit of a corner with some of the language that he's used.
Yeah, I think it's really hard to gauge what the president's going to do on this. In Syria, we saw him drop the quote-unquote mother of all bombs at one point when he was interested in retaliating, but against something ISIS had done. But, as I was discussing earlier, there was this incident with the drone strike where Iran shot down one of our drones earlier this summer, and it seemed to violate his red line, but he did back down from that. Mm-hmm. And certainly on the campaign trail in 2016, he kind of indicated he would get us out of what he called, quote unquote, endless wars in the Mideast.
Right.
But as I was alluding to earlier, sources close to the president told me right after the killing, that they saw Soleimani as a very major Iranian military leader. They made the comparison to Schwarzkopf, and they said that put us on the quote-unquote path. And they expected both retaliation from Iran and then a response from Trump. I think the real question that's going to come up with Democrats on the trail and on the Hill as we look at potential further escalation here is, what was this supposed intelligence that prompted the strike against Soleimani?
Right.
And my colleague Jenna McLaughlin has just published a story saying that Saudi officials warned of a cyber attack literally on the day of that strike. And that this warning, it didn't definitively accuse Iran, but experts believe that Iran was behind that cyber attack. Now, it's not clear that that's what prompted the killing of Soleimani. I don't think a cyber attack is the kind of imminent threat that the president has implied it was. But, when he was speaking in the Oval today, they actually asked the president, what was this intelligence that led you to make the decision to kill Soleimani? And Trump's comment was not an answer. He said, look at what he was planning. Right now it's classified. Mm-hmm. So I think that's going to be one of the bigger questions that we see emerge this week. What was this intelligence, and can the White House explain why they took this drastic step?
Well, that's what lawmakers are supposed to hear tomorrow. So we'll see. Hunter, thank you so much. Let's bring in now Catherine Herridge. She is the senior investigative correspondent for CBS News. Catherine, how did what we heard from Secretary Esper earlier today set the table for what we're seeing play out?
Well, at the news conference at the Pentagon earlier today, Secretary Esper really provided new detail and a lot of granularity about the intelligence that led to the strike last week. He was asked a question on whether this was imminent or an active plot, and he said it would be fair to say it was days, not weeks away, and that he was also very specific about General Soleimani, saying, I'm using the language he used, he was in Baghdad to coordinate attacks. So again, that tells you that the administration had assessed, based on multiple intelligence streams, that this was a plot, as I said today, that was in its final stages. A couple of other points, Tanya, that really stood out from Esper's news conference. He said Iran will retaliate. That was the expectation of the United States. And the backstory there is that we had reporting from my colleague David Martin at the Pentagon just about an hour or two before that, that military officials were very concerned by what they called as troubling movements of military Iranian assets in the region. And then also, finally, Secretary Esper offered what appeared to be a very public off-ramp for the Iranians. He said the U.S. was opened to a dialogue and a diplomatic resolution. And I keep coming back to that point because over the weekend, Republican Senator Lindsey Graham told CBS News that he was going to personally urge the president to to lay out a roadmap or a pathway to de-escalation. Senator Graham told me that he felt it was important for the president to appear strong, but also, his words, reasonable in the face of what's gone on in Baghdad last week.
And Catherine, are there any reports, I've been reading a few reports, I don't know if they've been confirmed, that Iran has said that if there is no retaliation for this attack, that's it, they're done?
Well, one of the things that caught my attention this evening was, of course, the timing. I always think it's important to look at the timeline and how these events kind of rack and stack. And just about the same time that these missile attacks were launched, we had the statement released by the IRGC, that's the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Council, so the umbrella group that's over the military. And they said that this was in revenge for the assassination of General Soleimani. And I reached someone within the White House who told me that they were paying attention to the statement because they felt this was very much for domestic consumption in Iran. This was a way to say to their own people, we are punching back against the United States. And my contact was operating off of very preliminary information, but they said they did not believe that this was the grand retaliatory strike that they had been anticipating or likely anticipating from the Iranians in response to the killing of General Soleimani last week.
So they didn't get the sense that the Iranians were done?
Not earlier today, but again, it's very fluid, so I don't want to go too far and speculate. But when I had my conversation, they said they felt that this was very much for domestic consumption to punch back against the idea that Iran was weak in the face of the United States.
Right. And you've been in contact with your sources within the administration. What is your sense about how quickly they will decide on next steps?
Well, I think you just have to look at the tick-tock of events this evening, Tanya. You saw the top national security advisors go directly to the White House and to consult with the president, and the White House was very public about saying the president remain engaged this evening, though at this point we are not expecting any statement or address from the president on the incident this evening. I don't want to speculate, but it seems clear from my reporting that they anticipated retaliation by Iran, and it was not necessarily the case that they would, and these are my words, take the bait and engage, especially in light of Secretary Esper's very public comments that they were urging Iran to take the path of de-escalation, and the U.S. was open to a dialogue with that country.
So it appears then, according to David Martin at the Pentagon, we were talking to him earlier, that, the Iranians did not take that olive branch, as it were, or did not see it as an olive branch.
Well, it certainly doesn't. It certainly doesn't look that way, because when you look at Secretary Esper's comments and then you look at the number of ballistic missiles that the Pentagon says was fired significantly from Iran and not by one of its proxies or not from Syria, which is about 200 miles away from the primary air base that was attacked. So they really took ownership, not only in the launching of the attack, but then again, this very public statement from the IRGC, Iran's Revolutionary Guards Council. This is the group that's over the military, saying it was us, it was in revenge for General Soleimani. So it was a very specific message to the United States. But again, I would emphasize the importance of the message domestically in that country as well, that they are punching back against the United States in this case.
Absolutely, and that they showed the airstrikes on national TV. It was something that they could put on the airwaves, as it were.
Seemed very choreographed, I would add.
Exactly. Now, did you get the sense that it will be of great significance to the administration whether there were U.S. casualties as a result of these attacks, or that the attacks in and of themselves were sufficient to warrant a response?
Again, in these situations, I don't like to go too far and speculate about what I think. I guess the other issue, if I could draw attention to tonight, is these classified briefings that they've had on Capitol Hill for the leadership, the so-called Gang of Eight. That would be a very highly classified briefing that would get into some of the sources and methods and a lot of granularity about how we obtained the intelligence, who we got it from, our partners in the region, and what we anticipate as next steps from the Iranians. I mentioned that because I'm sure you've noted already in your broadcast that the administration was very quick to notify the congressional leadership about the response from Iran this evening. There was no gap between what was happening almost in real time and that notification, and that seemed to be sort of paying attention to the complaints of the last few days that they had been left in the dark about what was clearly a very serious decision by the United States to take out this general.
Absolutely. All right. Well, Catherine Herridge, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Let's bring in now CBS News intelligence and national security reporter Olivia Gazis once again. So, Olivia, let's look at the bigger picture, if you will. How will these attacks impact the Trump administration's national defense strategy more broadly? And I ask that in light of the fact that, you know, there's a tension right now, I think, in the administration between not wanting to enter into any more foreign wars. I mean, nobody has an appetite for that after Iraq. And also, you know, the need to appear strong in the face of Iran's escalating military actions. So where will that balance be struck?
Absolutely, Tanya. And that's a very important point, and something that, of course, the president ran on was this notion that, you know, rather than being mired in the Middle East in these regional conflicts, we were going to step out of it. And a crucial part of his own administration's national defense strategy, this sort of seminal document that is put out annually that lays out a sort of worldview from the Pentagon on the part of the U.S. military, outlined this sort of necessary pivot to what it refers to as great power competition. You know, this notion that the U.S. is in a long-term strategic competition between nations like Russia and China, you know, rising powers or at least important powers that would need to sort of meet with a U.S. counterbalance as they try to rise to economic and military prominence. You know, there's this notion also that the United States would have to pivot away from its efforts at counterterrorism that it had sort of focused its intelligence and military capabilities on for over a decade. And in order to preserve an international order where the U.S. maintains some kind of dominance, to really invest on maintaining its competitive edge. You know, one other thing that is a sort of a second or third degree effect, not to diminish the immediacy and the urgency of what's going on with regard to Iran, but one of the sort of ancillary effects is that both NATO and the U.S.-led coalition to defeat ISIS have suspended their operations there, raising the very real specter that group could reconstitute in relatively short order. Military and intelligence officials have warned consistently that its propaganda, ISIS's propaganda machine, is still very much alive, and it does not take too much of an opportunity, too big a window for them to effectively, you know, regain at least some clout, if not territory. So that is a very important thing also to keep in mind as the administration plots its next steps here. Absolutely. That's certainly a complicating factor. But for all players involved, Ben Taliblu is also still with us. He is the senior fellow at the Foundation for Defense Democracies. Benham, if you could weigh in on this question of ISIS, right? Because, you know, ISIS is no friend to Iran, no friend to Iraq, no friend to the U.S., and yet there's tensions among all of these players. So how does that play out?
You know, in the short to medium term, if there is a pause, like we've been hearing as reported for the past 2 days, the counter-ISIS campaign and the counter-ISIL campaign by Washington, NATO, and the international coalition, that could be a boon to Iran. Remember, when the actual campaign, the fighting on the ground by Iraqi security forces and pro-Iran Shia militias, as well as, of course, the U.S. air power above, was going on. Iran used the fight against ISIS to solidify its control. It had basically created the IRGC model in neighboring Iraq. It had paramilitaries that eventually penetrated the administration. Invited you in to help fight that organization. لا إله إلا الله لا إله إلا الله أنا عندي خير علينا أنا أمريكان ثاني أنا أمريكان You can look at some of the battles. Some Iran-backed forces in 2014 even had U.S. air cover. that confluence of converged of course, take over Iraq totally would not be in Iran's interest either.
If the U.S. doesn't respond, how
it's very important that we follow this, as we need to, and take example from all sources of media, not just one or two. To stay woke and stay informed means you're looking at multiple sources, right? I saw an article today where the Muslims were planning on buying or not the Muslims, but the Iranians here in the U.S. were planning on buying a school, and they were going to start teaching them, their ways in the school and things like that. That was the only article I found, so I'm going to have to deem that one fake news, But, this is some serious business, and I don't think it's going to end here. I think there'll be more. I don't know if there'll be any domestic attacks, but there'll be more. I mean, I'm not going on record saying that we're at war. It has not been officially declared, but I think it's coming. So, again, my social media links are at the top. American Truth FL for Florida on Facebook and Twitter. Follow me. I post pretty regularly there. And I do have a page on Facebook as well as a group, so you can do either or both. Your input is just as important as everyone else's, for sure. So the more we know, the more we can stay woke, the more that we can get on top of things, the more that we can band together. And especially if it becomes a domestic problem, we're all going to need to step up and fight if there's a problem here. I'm not saying there's going to be. I think they would be pretty damn dumb if they did. I honestly do. I think they would be really stupid. But these people are extreme. They will go to any effort, any way, any kind of way to make their point. So I don't know. But there's a whole bunch going on YouTube right now. I'm going to go ahead and get off of here because I've got a couple things I need to do. But we just basically have heard that rockets were launched at U.S. military forces in Iraq at two bases. There was a strike. We saw that on Twitter. There have been Iraqi casualties. No confirmed U.S. casualties at this time. The Pentagon is evaluating the post-battle situation. That is their code for saying, we know what's going on, but we're not going to tell you because, we don't want Iran to know. And the best thing to do, you got to be, you got to be on alert, not paranoid. You don't have to be scared. You don't have to be living in fear. You continue to pay your bills. You continue to go to work. Live life as normal, but you gotta take time out of your day. Get off your, social media and your Twitter and shit and look and see what's going on. And as always, like, comment, subscribe, follow me on social media above. Okay? Because if we're all together as a group, we can all know what's going on. We have to stay informed. You're welcome, Rossi babe. I am not about to put out intentionally anyway, some fake news. I'm going to verify. When I heard this today, I looked at multiple sources before I figured out if it was true or not. So, again, go ahead and follow me on Facebook, Twitter. It's free. Give this video a thumbs up. Like, comment, subscribe. It's all free. Let's stay woke and stay informed. Have a great day.